When an empire declines, a variety of things have typically happened. Number one, overreach. That is a general term in which the empire declines, and as it does, it tries to solve too many problems in too many of the far-flung reaches of the empire, and it can solve one or two of them, but it misunderstands what it means for that empire to decline. What it means is you can't do all those things. You may have been able to do them 20 years ago, or 40 or 60, but you cannot anymore. I believe that what we're watching is the American empire declining as the British Empire and so many other empires before it declined, engaging in overreach. And here's what I mean. We fought a war in Korea back in the early 1950s. We couldn't finish it. And so Korea was left cut in half to one side, half to the other. In Vietnam, we tried the same game with an already split system because the French weren't strong enough to prevent the cutting of the country the way it happened. And the United States failed again. Only this time the failure was no split country left. Vietnam became a unified country under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh, the leader of the Vietnamese Communist Party. In Afghanistan, we were defeated again, and the country is now run by the Taliban, which was the ostensible enemy. I could go on, but I won't. I'll draw the conclusion. You can't do what it is this country sets out to do. It's not within your power. It may have been after World War II. We really were at the top of the mountain at that time, and there's an argument that we were for the rest of the 20th century. But you cannot make that argument now. The dollar is everywhere, becoming less and less important. It was once as good as or better than gold in the central banks across the world. It isn't anymore. It's barely half their reserves, down from much, much more than that. More and more trade is conducted not in the dollar as it once was, but in other currencies, not just the euro, but also the Japanese yen, Chinese yuan, and so on. What's my point? Israel is an outpost of the United States Empire. It was literally the creation of the British Empire beforehand, and it was handed off from a ward, if you like, of the British Empire into becoming a ward of the United States Empire. Israel exists because the United States supports it financially, economically, politically, culturally, and militarily. Never more so than right now. Can the United States afford to do that? My answer, and I believe this is the majority view in the United States, is a resounding and a clear no. And the reason for that is there is no end in sight. There will be generations of hostility between Israel and the Palestinians. What has just happened since October guarantees it. Now that will be extended to include not only the Palestinians of the south in the Gaza Strip, but the Palestinians of the north in West Bank, and now the people of Lebanon. And who knows how far this will go? Will the Israelis really want to be in a state of bitter hostility with their Arab neighbors indefinitely? Well, if that's what they want, that's what they're getting. And their only safety already is and will continue to be drawing the United States into a participation with them as far as they can. They cannot win this alone. They probably can't win it with the United States. But without the United States, it's over in a heartbeat. By the way, the same is true in Ukraine. That is only winnable if the United States pours even more than it already has, because what the United States has poured in clearly failed again. You can see where the battle lines are in Ukraine. The Israelis are on, if I were a shrink, I would call it a death trip. There's something here that is really so far out of the range of a reasonable policy that you begin to wonder what kind of mentality would keep going in this direction. The United States currently maintains somewhere between 700 and 800 bases abroad. And the entity that does that is the Department of Defense. All of that, we are told, and the whole world is told, is done for defense. Is there a defense component in it? Sure. But is there an offensive component? Equally sure. That's how you guarantee the dominance of the United States in its empire since the end, at least, of World War II, if not some years before. The Israelis have an ongoing struggle with the Palestinians that dates from the beginning of the country of Israel, as people who know the history know. To think that all of this is about the aggressive Palestinians and the defensive Israelis is to take seriously the kind of propaganda that even the people who put it out when you talk to them privately don't do. Here's a joke. More Israelis are clear that that's not true than Americans. They put out that propaganda for foreign consumption. Inside Israel, by the way, in recent weeks and days as well, massive street protests and other kinds of protests of huge numbers of Israelis who don't agree with this policy, didn't agree with what they did in Gaza, want Mr. Netanyahu out of office, want a reversal of the politics he represents. I mean, in America, you get people shut down for saying this, but inside Israel, you can say these critical things, and large numbers of people do, and the government dares not shut it down. At that point, Mr. Netanyahu has no options anymore unless he has a nuclear weapon and is prepared to explode it where he would decide to do it. He has no chips. The man is out of chips. That's why he needs the United States. What is he going to do? Go to war perpetually? Israel is a small country. The Arab world is a very large place. Palestinians are a small part of it. The whole Arab world is united on this question, more so than ever before. Do they want to fight with Israel? No. Clearly, they're afraid and they're hesitant. I understand that. But there's no solution here other than sitting down and working out an agreement. Otherwise, you have perpetual war. People like Netanyahu think that that's an option. It isn't. Any more than for Mr. Zelensky, that's an option. It isn't. You can talk like that, but sane people understand it's the bravado because everyone knows that the war in Ukraine, by the way, like every other war, will end with an agreement. It'll maybe be a very lopsided agreement. That's being decided on the battlefield. And then the question is raised, which I raise as a human being. Do you really want to destroy, to kill, to poison the relationships of human beings to the extent you are doing while you work your way to sitting down for the agreement you know has to happen? Mr. Putin in Russia made clear, and ironically, he was quite right. He said, the deal that I can make with you, Mr. Zelensky, is much better now at the beginning of our hostilities than it will be if we fight. And that's what's happened. Now they will be much poorer. Mr. Zelensky can't face it. In the end, that will be the heritage, the inheritance of the Israelis that are left. A legacy of hostility and bitterness that I would not wish on the Israeli people, even though they are in the end responsible for it. It is an extraordinary situation. And I'm not arguing where the rights and wrongs are. My guess is they're very nicely distributed on both sides. That's not the question. Hamas did a terrible thing last October. Israel has done a terrible thing. But the question of who escalates, I'm afraid that's all on the Israeli side. They made the decision to respond first the way they did in Gaza, then in the north, and now in Lebanon. And I fear for where that's taking them as well as everybody else. The course of action is the one they should have followed 2 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago. I understand the impatience you have and others. Okay, we can't go back and rewrite history or replay the game. I get it. but you're going to have to stop somewhere. How many losses in a row are you going to take? The Russians have shown the world something I didn't believe was true, that they have a very powerful military apparatus, not just the ground troops and all of that, but the ability to ramp up the production of missiles and planes and bombs and drones on a scale I did not understand. And I follow this stuff a lot. And it's true of the people who I rely on for information. We're all sitting here amazed. The message is a little too late to tell everybody, oh, you don't have to worry. The United States told Mr. Putin, you can't do it, you can't do it. He did it. The reality is out. You told the Israelis, look, you have to work something out. They gave us the finger, if you like, and we're stuck now with really unpleasant decisions of the sort you've perfectly nicely laid out. If the Israeli IDF invades Lebanon, there will be very quickly in the United Nations a virtually unanimous votes, excluding the United States, Israel, and maybe one or two little islands in the Pacific, who will vote in favor of the Israeli-American position, and the rest of the world will vote against it. How are you going to strengthen the argument in the world that what the United States is doing in arming Ukraine is because we are so dead against one country invading another, when we're providing the guns with which Israel and the IDF are literally about to do that? The cost to the United States is precisely to be stuck in the dilemma. The answer is not to choose which way to go. Let me give you a metaphor, if you don't mind. You're walking down the street. It's late at night. You're eager to get home. And out of the alley steps a menacing person who says to you, I have a gun here and I have a knife, and I'm going to give you free choice as to which way I'm going to kill you. Now, there's two kinds of reaction. One reaction is to sit there and puzzle over which way you should choose. The other one is to say, I don't accept the choice. I am going to look for another way out. The United States cannot continue to do what it is doing. If the Russians, given who they are and their size and their power, if they want to rework the boundaries of their situation in Europe, you got to sit down and try to work that out. And it's the same with Israelis and the Palestinians. I understand that the negotiation is difficult, but going into more war is not only not a solution, it's the one that's already failed, piling on more. You know, it's like that sorry political candidate who believes that every time a criticism is made, you double down and do more of it. The earlier incursions used the same argument that you're using now. They were defensive, and they would, quote, put an end to these hostilities, and it's the military brain thinking that when you win the war, you're done. All the smartest military brains, from Clausewitz on down, have understood war is just politics by another form. The whole point is that the previous invasions of Lebanon by Israel, like the previous hostilities between Israel and the Palestinians, were justified by many as solving their problem. It never did. If you think suddenly escalating the horror is somehow going to solve the problem that the earlier pre-escalation horrors didn't, then you live on a different planet from me. The Arab countries are becoming stronger and richer. That's part of the whole change in the world economy. It's reflected in their participation in the BRICS alliance. They are gaining in wealth, in capacity, in power. Israel is looking at a situation. What are they going to take on the whole world? I mean, this is a dead end. They ought to turn around before they get even more deeply embedded in this military solution. The Israeli economy, that's a phrase that has no content anymore. It's like the null set in mathematics. There's nothing in there anymore. They're going to be a basket case economically for years. Even if they, quote unquote, win, they're losing this situation. Netanyahu and the extreme right-wing government they have is itself a sign of the failure of what earlier politics had achieved. And the solution wasn't more violence. That was crazy to think that. Military people perhaps can be excused for thinking like that, but not the rest of us. And I hope that the sanity comes back and they come to their senses and realize they have to cut deals and that those deals will be painful.